Still having my morning coffee. Hello and welcome to episode 22 of Great Things with Great Tech, the podcast highlighting companies doing great things with great technology. My name's Anthony Spiteri, and in this episode, we're talking to Sirish Rigraman, co-founder and CEO at Platform9. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Now, Sirish, before we get into the meat of this show, talking about all things hosted platforms, managed services, talking a little bit about, one of my favorite subjects, vCloud Director, but then the maturity of the market and leading into Kubernetes. I just want to shout out. So if you like great things with great tech and would like to be on the show, please click on the episode link below or go to launch.gtwgt.com and register your interest. Just a reminder as well, all episodes are available on the Great Things with Great Tech YouTube channel. So please, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe below, and also go onto the podcast. Head up to Anchor. The show is hosted off Anchor, and then it's distributed to all the platforms out there. So Spotify, Apple, Google, every sort of podcast station you can think of. So that'll keep you busy with all the episodes past and coming up. So, right, Sirish, let's talk about Platform9, the company that was founded in 2013, and a company that I've known you for quite a while in and around that founding. But maybe just tell us a little bit about what Platform9 is, what you guys do, and a little bit about the history of the founding.
Yeah, so the mission at Platform9 is to enable freedom in cloud computing. And we do that by delivering a Kubernetes service that helps enterprises run private clouds, edge clouds, and hybrid distributed clouds. And my co-founders and I, Bick Lee, who was my mentor at VMware, he's a chief architect and co-founder. Madhura Maskaski, senior engineer architect at VMware. She's a co-founder and head of product. Rupak Parekh is our co-founder, CTO. He was also a very senior engineer at VMware. We were all early engineers at VMware. And we had this moment in the early 2011, 2012 timeframe when we had this realization that there's just something really big happening around cloud. But the way Amazon was doing it was an architectural breakthrough. But we also believe that there'd be a lot of interest in consuming cloud with this new paradigm, but that a lot of enterprises would need not just the public cloud, but also distributed clouds. And we felt that it was really important that existed. And that's what we ended up starting. We tried to start it within VMware.
Yeah,
and I think we got asked, how does it sell more vSphere? So that's when we knew
that old chestnut,
do this outside. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll talk a little bit about the specifics about where you came from and a little bit about why you decided to go down this path. But I mean, you guys within VMware, I mean, a lot of you guys were involved in well, actually, how good is this? I'm now actually saying Cloud Director because it's been sort of forced onto me. But back in the day, vCloud Director, you guys were sort of tightly involved around that product. Just talk a little bit about that, maybe. I mean, how much of you? I know that a few of you guys worked directly on the product, but what was your contributions to the product in those early days?
Yeah, so we worked on many things at VMware. I mean, I joined VMware, just for context for your viewers. I joined VMware when ESX Server hadn't been released. So my first project was actually to make Windows XP boot on VMware Workstation 3 beta. So we kind of go back a long way. And Bick, in fact, was engineer number 18 at VMware in 1998. Right? I think he started.
1998. Wow. Okay. I think it's one of the earliest I've heard. That's crazy. 18. Yeah, you forget that VMware is kind of like an old company, you know what I mean? Like it's a company that was founded in the relatively old, you know what I mean? Founded in the late 90s and kind of got bigger 10 years later.
Incredibly successful, right? I mean, it's done really well. So we obviously worked on many different things. One of the projects that Bick and I collaborated on very early in my career there was a product called VMware P2V Assistant. It became VMware Convertor, VMware Importer. And I had a lot of fun with that project because there's just something magical about, we'd have all these professional services people who would go in, walk into a customer site. This was in the 2003, 2004 timeframe. And they'd take like a data center with a lot of excess capacity, and they'd consolidate that into one rack of infrastructure and walk away. And that was like that aha moment. Right? That was, I think, the aha moment when people realized what VMware could do to their infrastructure efficiency. But towards the end of our tenure there, we were working on vCloud Director. In fact, Rupak Madhura and I were all engineers, senior engineers on the vCloud Director team, who were brought into the product in starting release 1.5. There's a release called Toledo, for those of you who know the release code names, right? And we made we were working on the enabling the organizational VDC to be sliced more flexibly from the provider VDCs and so forth. So placement, automation, and so forth. And why that I think is interesting is because VMware was just, I think, starting to understand that, look, the cloud is about a pretty fundamental shift, right? Before cloud, and by cloud here, I mean AWS. Before AWS, developers in enterprise organizations had to make do with whatever little access to infrastructure they got from IT teams. But with the rise of AWS, that fundamentally changed, right? Where developers could now build and prototype applications completely independent of IT teams, and maybe ultimately run them in production on Amazon or run them in the in-house data center, right? And this was something that startup developers were the first to take advantage of, the Netflixes of the world, the Adrian Cockcrofts of the world, the Instagrams of the world, and so forth. But my peer group outside, our peer groups outside VMware were all talking to us about this shift. And that's why we were interested in vCloud Director, because we felt it was really important for VMware, which had a very strong install base in the IT side of the house, to actually keep up and make sure that developers were happy with the product experience. And unfortunately, I think history will judge VMware on that. No, it's not up to me to pass judgment on that. But VMware kind of didn't deliver, right? I think there was a huge opportunity for VMware to deliver that consumption experience. And the reality is that VMware wasn't able to deliver that. And that's why you saw OpenStack in the very early days, and now you're seeing Kubernetes, and you're seeing a lot of open source technologies that are being built in part by to satisfy the needs of these developer communities that want to build applications in more portable manner, right? They want to be able to build applications that can run anywhere. And you don't get that from VMware.
Maybe let's that's a great sort of subject to talk about, and maybe we can chat about that a little bit later on as well, when we talk about the ecosystem in general and where this modern applications are going. Because you and I have had, even years ago, I remember some discussions around the state of containerization and next gen platforms and what's happening and the shift. But I think one of the points that I think you made, which was really interesting, was that virtualization represented a paradigm shift, because it was looking at making the gains in compute and overall CPU, RAM, storage, networking, the fact that was through Moore's law getting more and more powerful. We were still deploying servers as wholes, but there was so much going to waste. Virtualization and something like Workstation, like you said, enabled IT to basically realize more out of their investments and squeeze as much power as they could out of a server. That was the consolidation that we're talking about. That was so fundamental. And we'll talk about it later. I just want to remind and put a flag post in this. I'm not sure whether Kubernetes is doing that right now in terms of the same shift that what virtualization did. And maybe that's a little bit of an interesting subject around the uptake and where it's going and the maturity levels. When everyone says that Kubernetes is the next virtualization, or maybe it's not. But let's talk about that a bit later on. I think that's a really interesting subject. Let's talk more about the history before we get to that. I almost want to jump to that, but hopefully we can remember. I want to talk more about your founding and Platform9, and chat about where you guys are, because you do deliver the next gen open cloud for enterprises. So you've basically trying to get orgs to basically consume their platforms in a cloud way, through a SaaS-based product. I mean, it's out there. It's a SaaS-based platform. What does Platform9 stand for, by the way? How did the name came about?
So Platform9 stands for Platform 9 3/4 and Harry Potter.
So
for those of you readers who've read the books. And the inspiration for that was we had this realization, we had this aha moment after spending a couple of years working on vCloud Director. In a nutshell, we felt like we were not moving the needle. And we were the engineers, we were the senior engineers who were supposed to be working on the product, right? And look, I don't know how many of your readers have read Jeff Lawson's book, Ask Your Developer, but your developers know when something's working or something's not working,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And we were the engineers supposed to kind of lead this product evolution, and we just felt like it's not moving the needle. And the reason for that is because as we got more and more educated about what Amazon was doing, what customers were doing with AWS, we just felt that VMware had too much of a background in the IT and infrastructure world, and was just not able to pivot enough to focus on the developer and what developers really wanted. Because we came to the conclusion that what developers wanted was a broad range of compute services, but they wanted to be super simple and easy to consume so that they can focus on building their apps.
Yeah.
And by the time you deployed vCloud Director, Anthony, and you and I have talked about this offline, it's not quick and it's not easy. I don't know how quick and easy it is today, but it wasn't quick and it wasn't particularly easy back then.
It's
and
changed. It definitely has changed, but it's still fundamentally an old style architecture, right? If you want to call it that, right, in terms of how it deploys, and maybe a little bit more complicated as well because of all the networking, ironically, has made it more complicated. That was always the complicated part of it. And when you bring in NSX, NSXT, they've got RV networks now that are plugged into it. There's still this huge level of complication to architecting it. The other side of it's pretty good these days in terms of getting it up, cutting out a piece of vSphere, getting an organization up and letting your customer do stuff with that slice in that vOrg. But still under the surface, it's still a little bit of black magic. And that's probably not too much dissimilar in terms of what something like Kubernetes is on its own. And then maybe that's the value of Platform9. But yeah, you're right there. It's an interesting shift from that point of view. In terms of yeah, go ahead.
And this is where we had this realization that one of the reasons why there's so much complexity with the VMware product experience that we were just frustrated that we were not able to kind of make a dent on is because it's not SaaS. And Amazon Web Services is actually SaaS.
Yeah.
And we felt like the answer was staring us in the face, and it's staring everybody in the face, but nobody was really, pursuing like a SaaS approach to simplifying the operational experience, simplifying the developer experience so they could get more done faster. Yeah. And that's where the Platform 9 3/4 analogy from Harry Potter comes from. It's like, it's right in the middle of King's Cross Station.
Yeah.
Everybody's walking right past it, but the wizards know how to go through it to a whole new world of possibility.
That's okay. That's awesome. I'll be honest with you. I haven't read the Harry Potter books and I haven't seen the movies. I think I've fallen in that generational gap of people that just don't know and don't watch Harry Potter. It must be something about my
Harry Potter
age.
Is for all generations. Shameless.
I know. I've got to get. I'll get into
no
it
generation
with the kids. And I do know that wall situation, and I understand what you're talking about there. So you basically got something. You've been working on a product effectively. Let's break it down to a simple fact. You're working on a product. You want to take the product somewhere. You don't, and the powers that be are not letting you take it where you feel it's going to be the most productive. So, team of you guys, get out there. You say we're going to do this on our own. We can do this better, which is how a lot of great startups effectively kick off. You start in 2013, and then for a year you're doing this in stealth, and you come out of stealth in August of 2014, which is just before VMworld. I was there. I believe that was the VMworld that had the earthquake from memory. I'm trying to work it out. I think that was that VMworld in San Francisco. There was the earthquake there. So talk a little bit about coming out of stealth, out of VMworld, especially for you guys being ex-VMware employees now at VMworld with a booth, probably a little booth down the back, starting as Platform9. I'm just intrigued in that in terms of how that feels from your perspective.
It was one of the most vivid memories of our careers and certainly of Platform9. Look, I don't think we really competed with VMware. Even though VMware had a product that in theory was supposed to do something similar, the reality was that the product delivery model and the value proposition was so different that on the one hand, we were completely at home. We knew so many people. I mean, we'd all been there between 8, 9 years and like 15 years by the time we left VMware. So we knew a lot of people there, and there was a lot of respect for what I think the team there was doing. But at the same time, we also had a strong point of view in terms of the future of cloud and the future of kind of enabling developers. Ironically, if I look back in hindsight, you could even ask, because even that year, we came out of stealth at VMworld, but we then went to Amazon reInvent, and we felt like our story really resonated better at Amazon reInvent. than it did at VMworld.
Yeah.
And we had a very successful VMworld. So it's been this delicate balance of, are we an infrastructure value proposition? Yes, we are, in that we help infrastructure teams better serve their end customers and help them achieve more operational efficiency internally. But we're also a developer value proposition and a CTO or a DevOps kind of platform engineering value proposition. And that's kind of really ground zero for our value proposition, is people who are really kind of trying to build a modern application, a modern approach to enabling developers at scale. And enabling the use of cloud technologies at scale.
Because if I remember correctly, and you and I chatted early on in your days, I was interested in the platform straight away in terms of what it did. I was always doing research and R&D back in my previous role on new control planes for infrastructure, right? And that's where I saw you guys. And I remember I approached you and I kind of said, oh, look, can we somehow offer this as a service, right? So you and I actually, I remember, and this is the great thing about, working with a startup, is that you got on the phone with me yourself, the CEO, the founder. It was early morning your time, late at night my time, I remember, basically trying to, configure KVM networking. So we could basically get Platform9 working on a little KVM cluster that I had built within Zetagrid, just to show it off, because obviously prior to that I'd been obviously full vSphere and Hyper-V and whatnot, and I just remember the networking being outrageously complex. And but I remember we got there, so I saw the aha moment there when you've got this web-based platform, SaaS, it deploys a little agent locally, and then all of a sudden it takes control of the hosts. And then from that point forward, you have full management of that stack, right? I saw the value prop very early on. But you when you started, you did actually, I guess, because of where you came from, you did focus a lot on sort of the management of vSphere and ESXi hosts and KVM. And then I think it migrated into OpenStack. So just talk a little bit about those early years, because at that point, Kubernetes really hadn't taken hold at all. It was still a glint in Google's eyes, potentially. So that early days, it was a lot of kind of maybe some back and forth within your own team. What do we support? What are we doing? Like, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the abstract idea, this aha moment when I can say that's when we knew we were starting a company to go do this, was when we had this realization about SaaS and saying, listen, there's got to be a platform which is just SaaS-based, like Amazon Web Services is SaaS-based, provides a bunch of cloud services. Just add your hardware. Like imagine just add water, right? Like in an instant coffee, right? That's the simplicity that we wanted to go after. And then the question was, well, what are the cloud services that it offers? At VMware, we had this proprietary stack, vSphere and vCloud Director. And we looked at that and said, firstly, it's VMware's technologies, and it's not available for someone outside VMware to use. Secondly, having worked on it, we felt like there were a lot of deficiencies in the stack. It was very complex. It wasn't particularly, the API wasn't particularly modern, so to speak. It wasn't a REST-based API at the time.
Yeah.
And the REST retrofit was kind of forced. It wasn't very natural. You looked at Amazon and you said, well, what's out there that can compete with that? And that's kind of how we kind of looked at OpenStack and CloudStack. There was Apache CloudStack and there was the OpenStack Foundation. And as we studied that, we said, you know what? Our value proposition here, our innovation here is not actually building another proprietary stack. We're servicing people who want to have freedom in cloud computing. They want a fast and easy way to get the experience that they get from Amazon.
Yeah.
They want to get that on any infrastructure of their choice. Why build our own stack to do this? Why wouldn't we use open source technologies?
Yeah.
So we looked at LXC at the time. Docker was just about getting started, and we thought it was very early. We really liked LXC, but we thought it was very early. And we then looked at Apache CloudStack, which we thought was actually a good technology. But then we thought that the open ecosystem was actually converging around OpenStack.
Yeah.
And around that time, Hadoop had happened a little bit before OpenStack. And we kind of saw the power of these open source projects, right? I mean, at that time, Linux had been the biggest open source project in history. Hadoop was number 2 and OpenStack was number 3. And soon OpenStack would actually overtake Hadoop. So we said, look, it doesn't matter. The VMware's founding CTO, Mendel Rosenblum, he had a fantastic coding convention document within the company. It said, look, it does not matter what you feel about a certain style and what I feel about a certain style, what somebody else feels about a certain style. What matters is that we all agree on one and we stick to it, right? And one reasonable style and we stick to it, right? And we basically, that was something that I read when I was a very young engineer, fresh out of college, and kind of really was magical in terms of it made sense to me. And again, here we said, look, it doesn't matter that is the VMware stack better or CloudStack better or LXC better or OpenStack better. What matters is we pick the one that's going to become the open source community standard.
Yep.
And let's leverage that and deliver that as a service, right? In other words, let's go make that simple and easy to use as opposed to building our own proprietary stack. So we started with OpenStack. That was the first product. It was OpenStack as a service. And then, but we always kind of watched containers very, very closely because we believed that it was an evolution in terms of how modern applications are going to be built. And if you think about cloud and who is interested in cloud, it's developers who are building modern applications, right?
Yeah.
So we were very early on the Kubernetes ecosystem. I think we were there at DockerCon 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yeah.
With the beta of our Kubernetes as a service product.
Yeah. Just touching on that, actually. So I remember you and I had a very vivid conversation about the state of containerization, modern development and whatnot. And at the time, I remember you saying that, the developers that are out in the ecosystem at the companies, at the organizations today, which was, maybe 5-6 years ago, they basically develop on what they know, which at the time was heavily Java, .NET, that sort of thing, right? And what you said is that at this point in time, all the future devs, they're at university now, they're at college now, they're learning on these modern systems. These are the guys that are going to influence applications moving forward because that's what they know. And this is, I think, what we're seeing today with, a very strong DevOps movement, the move towards modern applications, cloud native. These guys are now maturing in their jobs, in their roles at these companies, and they're leading the architectural, direction of these applications, which is why we're seeing this significant uptake. So I never forget that as a conversation that we had because it was very true. You know what I mean? You're only influenced and your applications are led by the developers that develop them. And they know what they know because they've been taught something at a certain age. So it's just a continual sort of evolution in terms of how applications are wanting to be delivered versus the platforms that allow it. And I think more and more in this day and age, and this is true, and I think everyone would say this, the developers almost lead the infrastructure, whereas back in the old days, the infrastructure led the developers.
I think you said it, right? I mean, that's basically the biggest change that the cloud has brought, which is that because developers are free to go prototype and build an application in the cloud, it makes sense that they're liberated and they're empowered. And, the development, application design and application prototypes and development drives infrastructure as opposed to the other way around. And I think it's exactly how it should be. This is what makes sense. It's not to say that people don't have problems, right? I mean, you still see so many people struggling with cloud sprawl, like spend on cloud, still have to deal with private data centers, still have to deal with edge, have to deal with multi-cloud. So there's a lot of unsolved problems, which is why a lot of these people end up looking to open source technologies such as Kubernetes, because they hold the promise that you can build your applications once and you can not have to worry about, does the business at a later point in time require it to run in a certain customer environment or in a certain edge architecture, or in a different cloud provider's environment, right? I mean, that optionality is so important, and which is why I think Kubernetes has been so powerful, is because it's become the de facto open technology that promises to solve that problem.
So let's put a period of time. So in 2017. That's when you guys launched your first managed Kubernetes service, right? And at the time, it was, the industry's first infrastructure agnostic SaaS-based offering for Kubernetes, right? Basically managed Kubernetes deployed via your SaaS stack across on-prem, public cloud infrastructure. You also introduced a serverless technology, Fission. So talk a little bit about that launch and how you did actually decide to, right, Kubernetes is now at a point where we know we want to, obviously, potentially bet the future of the company on it. Let's write something around that. and come to 2017 and launch what I think becomes PMK, so Platform Managed Kubernetes. Chat about that period of time.
Yeah, we actually started working on managed Kubernetes as a service, back in the late 2014 timeframe, even before OpenStack as a service became generally available.
Okay.
OpenStack as a service only became generally available in the 2016 timeframe.
Yeah.
So, like Amazon had EC2 and the IaaS APIs, and it had ECS and Lambda, we believe that cloud is polyglot and that developers would need to consume cloud with applications that are running in VMs and applications that are running in containers and applications that are running in serverless functions. So exactly like that, we had an IaaS capability with OpenStack, and we chose at the time. Some of your readers or viewers may know that there was actually an effort. There were 2 or 3 competing efforts to Kubernetes. There was OpenStack had a driver called the Nova driver for Docker. We did not believe in that because we thought that the open ecosystem was actually aligning around Kubernetes, because Kubernetes offered more than just infrastructure orchestration, right? It offered an application platform, right? Auto scaling of applications, self-healing, modern, dynamic, elastic applications. And we again believe, like in the case of OpenStack versus CloudStack versus vSphere, we believe that the open ecosystem was aligning around Kubernetes as opposed to Mesos, Apache Mesos, or Docker Swarm.
Yeah.
And when we were talking, Anthony, all those years ago, Kubernetes was not the leader. It was, many people used to ask us, oh, we're doing something with, I remember we engaged with a team at Adobe in, I think in Utah, who said, hey, we're going forward with Mesos, right? And we said, look, that's all right. We believe that the open ecosystem is going to converge around Kubernetes as the open standard, because there's a number of criteria that need to be met for, it's not just the technology, right? It's also about the ecosystem and how friendly that ecosystem is to partner with. And we got that bet right. It was a really big bet for the company. And so we started working on the product in late 14, early 15. We had a beta at DockerCon 2016, and we made it generally available. It was an early version that was generally available in 2017.
Yeah.
But we obviously owned it over the years. And like you said, Anthony, it was the industry's first Kubernetes as a service offering. And it's a true SaaS service, right? There was GKE at the time, and there's Platform9. And it shows up in our G2 crowd reviews, for example. I believe we're the top ranked container orchestration technology in terms of the rating that users and practitioners have given us, right? So we're very proud of that. And we've been investing in the product ever since. And even in the last year or two, the product has matured significantly in terms of its capabilities.
So breaking that down, because in terms just to clarify what this is again, and we've talked about the bits and pieces, but effectively you get on the Platform9 website, you say you want to deploy a new cluster, and we'll talk about PMK a little bit in detail shortly. And then you basically connect to an infrastructure where you've deployed some sort of management agent, which then talks back to the SaaS. And then from there, you then tell it to deploy Kubernetes on there. So this could be on premises, this could be within AWS. That's really what we're talking about here. So you're agnostic to where this actually lives, but you're the control plane from the SaaS-based application.
Exactly right. And the problem that most people end up with Kubernetes eventually, right? If you're playing with Kubernetes, it's one thing, but if you're actually trying to run it in production, it's not just about deploying Kubernetes, right? Deploying Kubernetes is like the very beginning. It's the tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot of installers out there. But the real question is, when you're running in production, how do you keep up with new versions of Kubernetes?
Yeah.
How do you ensure that your Kubernetes environments are highly available and you're monitoring all the elements? It's a distributed system. It's a complex distributed system with a lot of moving parts. How are you monitoring everything from the kubelet responsiveness and availability to etcd to all the other Kubernetes components across a multi-node cluster with multiple masters? When one of those components has an issue, do you detect it? How do you detect it? How do you remediate it, right? And then when a new version comes out, how do you, like a security patch comes out or a new version comes out, how do you upgrade to it? When you're using it at some kind of scale, let's say you have teams of developers, like now 10s, then 20s, then 50, 100 developers across multiple engineering teams that are using this, how do you give them all different clusters and shared access to the right places and not at the wrong places and so forth? It becomes a huge platform engineering problem. Again, going back to the founding vision of the company, Anthony, you go to an Amazon EKS, and Amazon takes care of that for you. And they're taking care of that for you by using a lot of automation and software-based management plane. But that's only available to you with the Amazon data center,
Yes.
right? What Platform9 does is essentially the same thing, right? We're building an open source-based, Kubernetes-based cloud experience that's completely managed with automation, with a very high degree of availability. We contractually sign up for availability contracts with our customers of the Kubernetes clusters. But unlike Amazon, those Kubernetes clusters are running in your data centers, on your edge environments, or in your cloud provider environments. They could be in Amazon, they could be in Azure, they could be in Google. So it really makes Kubernetes your lens into cloud, as opposed to having to build your application to different cloud providers and constantly deal with the porting challenges across the different environments.
Yeah, and I get it. I think with, having dived into Kubernetes a little bit lately, there's a lot of FOMO out there, so you have to kind of understand it a little bit, right? It's not simple. Like, no matter what anyone says, and look, there's a million articles out there about how to set it up on an Ubuntu server or CentOS, literally step by step in terms of what you got to do. You could go deploy it on Google, you could go deploy it on Amazon and Azure and pay a bucket load if you want to test it out. But the reality is, like you said, it's easy enough to follow some set of instructions and get it installed, to do a kube control get nodes and have a look and see if everything's up and ready. But then what? You know what I mean? Then as a practitioner, I could go and deploy a containerized service on Kubernetes and it'd be all good. But that doesn't mean that that's going to transition into a production system. You know what I mean? So there's a lot that needs to be done to get from a simple step-by-step deployment that you do from Google versus what you do to set up something that's going to run critical applications in production, highly available. And that's the value prop that Platform9 does offer completely. We'll step forward a little bit. Just the last part. I'm just interested. You guys have obviously done pretty well in terms of funding and round raising. I think February 23 this year, you had your latest Series D, which was 12.5 million. So you guys are still getting some really good investment, which shows that there is belief in what you guys are doing is right. And it must have been an exciting time from that point of view as well, to basically be part of these series rounds and in terms of where it's going. What's it like on that side of the fence as well, in terms of the continual evolution of the company?
We've been very fortunate to have, I think, a very strong investor syndicate, starting from our very first investors to the most recent ones. The most recent round brings us to a total of somewhere around $75 million in equity capital, and there's more than that we've raised. And so there's been, I think our investors have obviously, I think, understood the nuances of the market, right? That Kubernetes kind of didn't happen overnight. But as you mentioned, Anthony, there's an increasing sense of FOMO and inevitability to Kubernetes, right? I think in the early days, there was KuberWatt, there's DockerWatt, everything's going to run in VMs. To then there's all this, Kubernetes versus Mesos versus Docker, Swarm, and Docker, the company was raising massive amounts of money. To eventually there was the realization that maybe the Kubernetes is the de facto container orchestration technology. To now there's a real sense of momentum in the market, because there's major market shifts that are happening, right? There's major new markets that are advancing today. For example, the 5G market opportunity. But today, if you're in the midst of a new market initiative, like a 5G rollout, you'd be crazy not to use something like containers and Kubernetes, right? And that's what's happening.
Just explain, what does a 5G rollout mean for those people? Because a lot of people think 5Gs are like phones, right? Like, obviously 5G is more of a network technology, but it's like 5G, not cellular, 5G that's being used inside for a network, right? So is that what 5G is today? It's just basically, when you say 5G rollout, what exactly are you talking about?
So there's a few different dimensions to this, Anthony, and it took me a while actually. I'm a virtualization systems guy. I understand that space very well. What was kind of very surprising to me over the last few years as I've learned about this is that the entire communications network is not at all virtualized. It's very, the penetration of virtualization. We take virtualization for granted, like
Absolutely.
in the data center world or in the cloud, it's all running on virtualization, right? But in the telecommunications networks, the penetration of virtualization as a share of workloads that are actually running is actually very low. So if you look at a telecommunications network, there's a back office systems, which tends to run on a classic like data. It looks like any other enterprise back office, right? So it's probably running on VMware, probably looking to move to the cloud and rebalance and so forth.
Yeah.
That's not terribly exciting. It looks a lot like an enterprise, deployment of a back office IT infrastructure. But if you look at the actual network, you look at the communications network, the 3G network, the 4G network that all of us are using and relying for voice calls, data transport, and so forth. That is where there's something really interesting starting to happen, which is that as 5G networks are being rolled out, it's not exclusively to 5G, but the rollout of 5G networks is all happening after containers have been well established as a packaging technology. Now, these telecom network operators are very interested in virtualizing the network and moving from physical devices and bare metal servers and firmware devices to actually packaging to container-based packaging of the software components that support radio networks and actually support the voice core and the data core, because it means greater velocity. It means greater agility, right? You can deploy something in software. You can actually do statistical multiplexing where you can run multiple workloads on the same piece of hardware. You can run commodity hardware and lower the cost of hardware. You can even offload to the cloud more easily than if it was running on a piece of bare metal. So all the reasons why we all love virtualization are the same reasons why the telecommunications networks are interested in virtualization. And 5G, as it's being rolled out, is actually forcing the refresh of that entire stack based on containers. But here's the interesting part. Okay? I was doing some research recently for one of our partners who's OEMing us in the space. And we had this realization that just in a small set of geographies in the US and Western Europe that we're focused on, there's 3 million nodes of compute that are going to be running Kubernetes to support this rollout. And that's staggering, right? Because it turns out that 5G is not just being used by communications network providers, it's also being used for enterprise scale, like a large scale Wi-Fi deployments. Like if you look at utilities, if you look at manufacturing facilities, if you look at warehouses, you can actually choose not to deploy Wi-Fi. You can choose to deploy like private 5G using portions of the spectrum that governments have made available. And so that's why this is something that's really exciting. And for those of us in the Kubernetes ecosystem, it's a really interesting market opportunity because it's a net new market opportunity that is not serviced by traditional virtualization because it's too heavy and complex for distributed deployments in the field. And the public cloud doesn't reach where the 5G networks are being deployed.
And again, Platform9 wants to be that control plane for those 3 million nodes, as an example. That would be fantastic.
We'll take that.
So with that, so where do you see Kubernetes today? I mean, we touched on it early on, and I know you've got some thoughts around where it is today. What do you think?
I think this is probably a very controversial topic, right? But having the vantage point that I have, I think that it is a bit of a tale of two cities, so to speak, right? There's the city that has it all and the city that really is very early with it. I think that Kubernetes is well established amongst technology companies. I mean, at least in the Bay Area and in tech companies outside the Bay Area. I mean, if you look at Shopify, or you look at Spotify, and companies outside the Bay Area, so Redfin, for example, based in Seattle. There's a lot of tech companies that have proven that Kubernetes runs at scale and it delivers on the value proposition that it has. One of the reasons why I think the success today is limited to them and it isn't pervasive across other industries is because the barrier, the complexity barrier is high. And what that means is that the payoff for you needs to be really, really high for you to be willing to jump over that barrier, you as a customer, right? Imagine you're a tech company and you have more than 100 developers or 200 developers. To you, something that gives them an extra 10, 20, 30, 40% in terms of feature velocity, auto-scaling, self-healing applications, elastic applications that scale better, that run more efficiently in cloud computing instances, that ROI is going to be phenomenal, even if the investment involved is very high in terms of replatforming your applications, reskilling your developers, and so forth.
Yeah.
But that is not the case if you're not a tech company. And that's, I think, a criticism I would say everybody, including Platform9 in the Kubernetes community, needs to accept, which is that Kubernetes has been it's been relegated to the tech elites. And I think the community needs to do more work to simplify it, to make it more mainstream and beyond tech companies.
Which is what you guys do. And you guys have, when you register for Platform9, there's a lot of learning materials that you guys offer to your customers. Once you register, even they're all up there, right, on Platform9, the website. So what I'm hearing there as well is that education is key here, and it's incumbent on guys like you, like Platform9, to basically help educate the market as to where things are going, how you can leverage this platform better. Because you're right. This is interesting, right? So traditional infrastructure guys who work in more traditional organizations, finance, just general mum and dad, small, medium businesses, they're not going to deploy a Kubernetes cluster just yet, and they might not. A lot of workloads have moved from an on-premises to SaaS. There's still workloads that live on-premises. But then I think, as more to the point, as developers become more and more used to this world, I think that's when the shift will start to happen, and when it will become more mainstream in those organizations. It's absolutely being driven. I mean, you mentioned Spotify, Shopify, all these kind of cool, Silicon Valley cloud native startups. There's no doubt that those guys are driving this internally because that's what they know. They're attracting the best of the best in terms of the talent that wants to use it. So yeah, the mainstream penetration of Kubernetes still isn't there. And I was speaking to Niraj from Kasten on the show last year, and he said the same thing. He said, really now is when we're starting this maturity play. It's been around for 5 or 6 years, but now we're at the point where it's starting to become understood and matured. And I think you see that with a lot of people in the IT space, in my space, getting to know it better and understanding it. And to that end, I'm understanding Kubernetes better through using Platform9, which is crazy, right? The stuff that I've been able to do, it took me a long time initially. If I wanted to get a Kubernetes tinkering site, a lab set up on Ubuntu, on some Bare OS, it was a complicated process, right? But I've used Platform9, in the last couple of weeks to basically achieve what I was trying to do and achieve it within 5 minutes. I think that's crazy. And that's kudos to what you guys are doing in terms of, taking something that is inherently complex and delivering a simple way to not only install config, but manage it and keep the operations going, So I think it's really great what you guys have done. And then with the education, you guys will continue to basically bring that more mainstream. And then at some point in the next, 2 to 5 years, there'll be that moment where it does actually flip. I think you'll agree. It's never going to be completely there in terms of, and it's not going to replace virtualization. Absolutely, is it? It's not going to happen. I don't see that happening.
Firstly, Anthony, thank you for the kind words about your experience with Platform9. I think there's a lot of engineers who work really hard to develop that really simple product experience that we're very proud of, and I think it's all credit to them, really. To answer your question, I think that solutions like Platform9 have made the operational parts of Kubernetes easy, and we certainly have great documentation, right? One thing that we ask ourselves is, well, why do you need so much documentation, right? Because, look, I think that my personal view is that Kubernetes risks kind of going down in history as a technology for large-scale tech companies. So if you look at a Shopify or a Spotify or all these major tech companies that are well known to use Kubernetes, they have very, very large-scale operations, right? I mean, there's the number of their engineers that they have, but then you also think about the scale of their internet services. Yeah. And at their scale, even 10, 20, 30% improvement is massive, right?
Yes.
So they're willing to spend a lot of money in very expensive, complex platform engineering capabilities because they're at such large scale. But that doesn't represent, we have somewhere around 20 million software developers in the world. How many software developers are working at such large scale tech companies? Maybe a big portion. I don't really know the answer to that. Maybe it's like 10, 20, 30%. But I've got to believe that the large majority, the silent majority, is actually working in smaller companies where they would very much like to have the velocity, the self-healing, the agility that cloud native promises, but they don't want it to be so complex and so difficult to adopt, right? So one of the things that I think Platform9 is doing, and we'll have more announcements around this in the months and years ahead, is how do we simplify that experience? And that's actually where Fission, the serverless functions as a service framework, came from. We open sourced it. It came out of a desire to simplify the application developer experience running on top of Kubernetes. Now with Fission, we thought we went too far to say it only works with functions. Okay. Because now you then limit the kinds of applications that you can actually run on it, even though the experience was fabulous and we're very proud of it. So I think we are still working on how do we retain the generality, but simplify the developer experience and learning curve to Kubernetes so that you don't need to read the documentation, right? Our goal is that you don't even need to read the documentation.
Yeah.
And anybody can be up and running. And we want to kind of lower the complexity by 90% from where it is today. And it's not just the operational complexity which Platform9 simplifies, but really the developer and DevOps complexity around Kubernetes that we want to simplify.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I think I usually ask, we'll start to wrap up now. We could chat for a couple of hours and keep on going on the subject. It's so fascinating, and you're a wealth of knowledge in terms of in the industry. You've articulated, I think we've articulated. And I always ask the question around, what have you done to innovate? And how you're going to continue to innovate and disrupt the market. I think you just really answered how you're going to continue to innovate and disrupt the market through that simplicity, taking out all the documentation. The initial innovation and disruption was clear to see. You guys took something that was inherently difficult, wrapped a service around it and exposed it and basically made it agnostic and made it easy to consume. So, I think you guys have done a really good job of the value prop of the company. It's amazing to see where it's come from, having, seen the company from the early days, the evolution of what you guys were supporting, now heavily focused on Kubernetes, having actually used it again. I can't stress enough how good the experience is. And, we'll link in the show notes to the website. You've got a free tier as well, which is so important these days. So just maybe to wrap up, just give a little bit about this very quickly about the free tier, what you guys are offering and anything else that you want to kind of, talk about the company to wrap things up.
Yeah, look, I think I'm so proud of the free tier because the free tier is actually the latest and greatest from Platform9, and it is the full product. Yeah, there's no gates, there's no limitations. It's limited in terms of what support you get and what scale you can run it at without licenses. It's the full product, and it is something that gets better every 2 to 4 weeks. We release new versions into the free tier, and it's growing really nicely. That install base of users on a free tier is growing about 15% every month, and it's actually that rate of growth is accelerating. So we're incredibly excited because we think, look, this is a market where, how many companies are running Kubernetes? I'd like to say is maybe in the thousands now, low thousands now. And, we've got some share of it, like I would say 10, 20% of it.
Awesome.
And we think our free tier is how we kind of make it more accessible, saying you don't need to pay us any money to be able to get access to this technology. But obviously, if and when you grow your usage, we hope you'll consider becoming a paid customer. But it is the entire product as it is, with no gates whatsoever. And that's how it'll remain forever. And we're just very proud of it.
Awesome. Good stuff. Awesome. So very good, Sirish. Look, it's great again. Thanks for being on the show. Again, I'm going to put all of the links to Platform9 in the show notes. We'll link there. You can find me at Anthony Spiteri and at GTWGT Podcast and at gtwgt.com. Again, if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe below on the YouTube channel. And with that, Thank you, Sirish. Thank you, Platform9. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Great Things with Great Tech.